is Friday. Can you believe it's Friday already? June 5th, 2020, 5:01 p.m. Once again, blame YouTube for our being a minute late. You know, Kate, it's your day for the monologue, so take it away.
So I am just sitting here enjoying this. It was supposed to be an Aperol spritz, but I grabbed the wrong bottle, so now it's a Campari spritz. But that's the worst thing that's happened to me today or this week. Then I'm doing pretty well. I'm just kind of. I think that the last couple of days and weeks have been overwhelming for everyone, no matter where you are or what you're doing. And I kind of miss being in New York very much right now, actually. Probably for the first time, and really missing kind of the community of being in New York. And so, anyways, I'm sitting here and thinking about that, and kind of very excited today to meet Gail. And I was thinking about this all day. I have no idea what to expect. I actually didn't spoil this episode for myself by looking up her work ahead of time, because I wanted to leave it to be a surprise. But I was like thinking about it all day, like what it was going to end up like, what it's going to look like, this idea, and thinking about like how great the conversation was yesterday with David. And then coincidentally, the podcast that we did together came out. So you can check that out on the National Constitution Center's podcast that's hosted by Jeff Rosen, who is the director of the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. And yeah, that's kind of everything is still covered here with a thin, not that thin anymore, frankly, thin layer of yellow dust. I don't know if it's like that in DC or in Maryland, but there is just pollen coating everything, and it's gritty, and it's in your eyes, and it comes in through open windows, and I'm just really desperate for a rainstorm to like knock it all out of the air and pool it into places that I can sweep it away. So that's it.
We are not allowed to have fun anymore. In fact, in Washington, D.C., the air is heavy with the storm that is going to come in the hour that we are talking to Gail. It's going to be loud. It's going to be one of those DC thunderstorms. We're not allowed to have fun anymore, but it is a monumental pleasure to welcome to the show Gail Albert Halaban. Gail and I have known each other since I guess we were 17 or 18. We were camp counselors together, I think is how we met. And Gail was a photographer then. She is one of those rare people who knew what she wanted to do with life in high school and then did it. She is a celebrated photographer. And for present purposes, she is the inventor of a kind of photography that has kind of come into its own in an era in which we're all stuck at home. A number of years ago, when I was writing about drone strikes, Gail called me up and said, it was one of the weirder phone calls we've ever had. She's like, I'm thinking about drones, and I'm thinking about killing terrorists, and and she's like, I've started doing this new kind of photography where you take pictures of people through their windows. And I was thinking maybe we should use drones to do that. And of course, I'm thinking this is the creepiest thing I've ever heard. But she explains to me that that it's all with the consent of the people in question. And I thought it was a bit eccentric, but it turns out that this is catching fire in the age of coronavirus. And Gail's work on the subject, which has gone back now, it's like 15 years now, right, Gail?
15 years, yeah. But I didn't end up using drones after that conversation. I decided it was a little too creepy. I became much friendlier.
The thing is about drones, though, is now you could do them and it wouldn't be creepy at all, because people are super used to, like, there's that incredible video of a drone tour of old Rome taken in emptiness because everybody's at home. It's an incredible video and nobody thinks it's creepy. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the idea, I want to take pictures of people through their windows with drones, like it would come off very different. And also the technology was less well developed. So Gail, get us started. Share your screen if you like. Tell us how you got into window-to-window photography and how it's being used now, and what, like, these projects that you have taking pictures of people all over the world through their windows. The floor is yours.
Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
You do.
So I photographed from one window to a neighboring apartment window in cities around the globe. But I didn't end up using drones. I ended up asking neighbors if they saw into their neighbors' windows to go ask their neighbors permission. And once they asked their neighbors permission, I then set up a shoot so that we're all talking at the same time. And the neighbor who sees into the neighboring window tells me what they normally see their neighbor doing and why they like to look at their neighbor. So for example, this one is from Anita's apartment to Lieu's apartment. Lieu was 94 at the time of this. And Anita said she looked into her neighbor Lieu's apartment window every morning because she wanted to be able to just check on him and make sure he was okay. And when she would see that the shades weren't up, she would know something was wrong and would go check on him. So the relationship from neighbor to neighbor in cities, I think, gives us a lot of comfort, even if we don't know the neighbor. We just don't feel quite as alone, which I think right now, a lot of us are really experiencing. The idea of being close to your neighbor makes you feel not lonely in this crazy time.
These are incredible.
This one is a fun one. Every person in this building is elderly, and they told me they like to look at their neighbors it was a modern new building on the Upper East Side. And they like to look at their neighbors because they were young families, and it was like watching their surrogate grandchildren. So this is the view across the way.
Oh, wow. So interesting.
So talk about how you got into this.
So my daughter, who I think just walked by, is 16 now. She was 16 this week. On her first birthday, the neighbors at the flower shop across the street, who I had never met, knocked on our door with balloons and flowers and a card that said, "Happy birthday. It's really been fun watching your daughter grow up." And I had never met them. So at first I was super creeped out. And then I just felt like, wow, that was really like nice and comforting that somebody had an eye on me when I am home late at night with her. The windows are dark. I didn't realize anyone else was around. To know that somebody was keeping an eye on me really gave me a real sense of connection. So I asked people who else had this experience. And I did it for many years in New York, not realizing it was a project. It was just like something I got obsessed with doing, like who else sees their neighbors across the way.
That's an incredible shot.
Thank you. And has stories of the neighbors. And what I found is people really loved the project because they liked an excuse to go meet these neighbors that they had these long-term relationships with that they'd never met. The people across the way from you are really important in your lives, but you don't tend to get an excuse to meet them. And I feel like everybody ends up with a real sense of community by participating in this project.
There was I can't remember. I don't think it was fiction. I think it was an actual story. Maybe it was even to an advice columnist asking whether they should do something. I can't remember where it was. I'm trying to find it now. I'll find it eventually. But the story was of a woman who had watched a young couple through like get like assume like get married, get like through a window, and then had like do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think one of them ended up like getting cancer.
Yes, and then the woman like got
dying.
Yeah, or the man got cancer, and like she watched that entire thing play out, and she was like, I've watched them be alone. I think it was the man, and then the woman was left behind. She was like, I don't know if I should like go and talk to her or tell her. I cannot find it for the life of me right now, but I'll probably find it later. But it was like, it reminds me very much of like the relationship you're describing, which is very unique to urban settings. But it's actually, like, what I'm curious is, do you think it's unique to urban settings, or do you think that people know their neighbors just much more directly in non-urban settings? There's a false wall that goes up because everyone is so close, and there's so much like there's a lack of privacy when you like share all these walls with people, that I think that there is like, people talk about people in New York don't know their neighbors, but like that's kind of on purpose because you want a little bit of anonymity and a little bit of space when you're so close together with people. I'm curious whether you ever do this in a non-urban setting.
So right now during COVID, I have actually been doing it a different way where I'm not going to places. Instead, I'm asking people to go meet their neighbors and do the project with me on the phone. So let me try to just, there we go. So wherever people are in the world, I am having them do the project. So let's share these. I can show you some of those.
Do you do the art direction when you do these?
Yeah. So what I do is I'm on the phone and like I really explain to people how to do the project, like in pretty great detail. So this is somebody who lives in Mexico, in San Miguel Allende. So it's not really city. I actually had met him in Rome 2 years ago, and I was photographing, and he was helping me. I hired him as an assistant, and he saw this woman across the way in the window, and we had to go ask her permission. So he met her, and they actually haven't been apart since that day. He moved to Mexico from Rome to be with her, where she was a tourist from Mexico. So this project has been.
Wait, are they like in a relationship?
Yeah, they're engaged now.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, all from this project. So these pictures that I've been doing in remotely have been very random. It's like whoever wants me to teach them how to do this project, I teach them all the technical steps, and we set up a time and we're all on a Zoom together, and I direct them how to do it with collaboration. It's definitely like not me being too bossy, but we're all equal collaborators. And I explained to them the light, the f-stop, the shutter speed. Some of them, like this one was done with an iPhone, but like this was somebody who like had a good camera, didn't quite know all the technical ways of doing it. And I explained how to do the project. This is one I really love, where you can see there's a little boy playing with a toy, an old man here. And this is a guy who took the picture I had.
And where is this?
This is in Naples. And
I was just going to say, this looks so Mediterranean to me.
Yeah, it's so Italian. And the guy who helped me do this, I had met him on Instagram. He always liked my posts and said nice things. And so I just direct messaged him and asked, like, could we do one in collaboration? And it was such a great collaboration because he's in Naples and has a really close relationship with the neighbors. Like Italians are particularly Southern Italians, tend to be very open with their neighbors and leave the windows open, the lights on, shades, and scream across the terraces. So like, I feel like I could not have had such an intimate experience with these people the way he had. So this is in Krakow, Poland. So they tend to be more urban. This is also Krakow. But with this project, doing it remotely, I've been open to non-urban settings. So this is actually in Buenos Aires, Argentina, but in a suburb. And It's a self-portrait. The woman in yellow actually set her camera up outside and set a timer and ran in to pour her drink and be in the picture. And the reason she did it this way instead of photographing in a neighbor's is during the quarantine in Buenos Aires, they're very strict and you cannot go out. And if you go over to a neighbor's, you risk getting ticketed by the police. She had to take her daughter to a doctor's appointment just like 3 miles away and was stopped 6 times. So she felt like she couldn't go meet the neighbors. She had to do it of herself. So the project changes a little depending where we are. This is in Sweden, where the COVID has been much more relaxed, and these people were very easily able to like go knock on their neighbor's door and talk to them.
I think that there's something fascinating about this too, because I think that if you don't have the backstory of how you do all of these, the various layers of the backstory, I think, changed the relationship with the viewer with the picture. Never mind, obviously, it changes. So, like, for example, like I might have thought that you just kind of were being totally voyeuristic in the sense that you were just dropping in on a lot of these people and catching them totally unawares. And so then it changes what I think about the picture, that I know that they know you're there taking pictures.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And Ben says I knew when I was 16 what I wanted to be. And I always wanted to be a photographer. I had a camera, made it for my first grade science fair, always loved photography, yearbook photographer in high school and newspaper photographer in college. But then I wrote my thesis on the history of social documentary photography. And I realized like too many pictures were actually starting to destroy our connections with each other. We weren't having intimate conversations with people anymore. We were just taking quick snapshots and not really investing in real relationships. And I was looking a lot at documentary and street photography, and I was really troubled by the fact that people could be out in the world and their picture was taken and never told, never asked consent. And I just felt like that was really mean. So I actually was pre-med in college. I didn't end up studying much photography.
I had no idea you were pre-med. You guys both went to Brown, by the way.
Oh my God, this makes perfect sense to me. Did you end up being I was a neuroscience and history major at Brown, so we're the same.
So I ended up doing an art history degree and taking photography classes at RISD and studying cognitive science and computer science also. And like Brown's great because you can do a little bit of everything and not make a decision. But then the night before the MCATs, my father said to me, "Do you really want to go to medical school? Like, is that really what you want?" And I said, "No, I want to go to art school." And I applied to one art school. I was like, if I get in there, I'm going to like, just go. And so I did. And that's when I decided to be a photographer. But I decided very consciously that I would not ever take pictures without collaboration of my subjects. Like, I really feel like this was before the technology was such that it is now, but I just feel like there are cameras everywhere. I want to know what's happening with my images.
So I'm really interested in this, specifically because I grew, as a lot of people on the show that watch regularly know, I grew up in Rochester, New York, which was the birthplace of photography and the Eastman Kodak Company. And it felt very much in like going to the Eastman Kodak Museum every couple of years was like just something I always did. And there's a really interesting, and I also ended up doing privacy law and other types of things. And so there's a very famous case called the Roberson flour sack case, which was like a woman had gone to have her photograph taken with like, I don't remember if it was like I think it was something that was like, it was like a Garotype or something. It was like before there was something like Brownie cameras, and she'd gotten to have her photo taken and like for whatever purpose. And her photo had ended up being sold to this flower company, and they just like put her face and this shot of her that was just from like this, from the neck up, like And she filed a suit against this, and this invented basically this tort of a right of publicity suit in your own image, because she was so scandalized and horrified by the fact that her image was now selling flour, sacks of flour. And it was just, I'd never, but the social meaning of photography and your image being out there is so interesting and fascinating. And it has changed so much over time as the technology has altered. I'm just curious, do you still look at that, or have you seen it change just with like the ease and the birth of iPhones over the last 15 years?
I mean, definitely. Like, first of all, there's the case of Philip Lorca de Corsa, who photographed people on the street, and he's in collections of Met, MoMA, all over the world. Major photographer, major museum collections. His pictures sell for probably $50,000 each. And one of the people in his picture sued him and didn't have the right to his own image because it was considered art, not commerce. So
that's like, it's a very contentious suit. It's like, it's a very tenuous right for individuals.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's just like what's legal and what's kind are very different things. And I feel like there's just no reason not to be kind in photography. And a lot of the point of my pictures is to connect people with each other and build community. There is another photographer who, after I did this project, did a very similar project to mine, photographed his neighbors in Tribeca through the windows and did not ask permission at all. And they sued him and he won the suit. And apparently you have a right to photograph into somebody's windows if they have their lights on and their shades up. But I don't think it's very kind. So I feel like kindness is very important.
So Christopher, who always has interesting and thoughtful questions, has technical questions about how you're doing this. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, thanks so much for taking the question. This goes really far now from the conceptual discussions you had, but I would like to know in the images you've shown in the beginning, where we see the buildings in relation to each other, it really looks like the depth of field is really immense, and the interior lighting in the apartments looks very like cinematic, and I would like to know a bit more about that, maybe how you do it just technically.
So the early work I showed, the ones in New York City, were shot on a 4x5 camera, on film, not digital. And I light my pictures. All the pictures are very, like, my lighting is very important to me. So everything is staged and lit. These pictures, the later pictures, when I started to travel to France and Italy and Istanbul and Argentina to do the project, I switched to digital. And now I work with 100 megapixel digital camera, which I think has a very similar feel to the 4x5, but it means when I go through TSA that they don't open my film boxes. But they're lit and staged, and I always hire a location scout in the city before I go, so I understand what the light is at specific times of day, so I can plan the shoot to be when the light inside and outside perfectly match.
It's incredible. Do you have to do it over multiple days, like to try to get the right lighting and conditions?
So I live in New York with 2 kids and go on shooting trips and try to be as efficient as possible when I go to shoot. So I really, really try to do all the pre-production I can in advance, and I don't reschedule shoots. So I do 2 shoots a day in whatever city I go to, and usually the planning works. Obviously, weather changes. This is a great example, actually. The one we're looking at now, I was supposed to be shooting across the way, and it was planned to shoot across the way, but it was so foggy when I was shooting across the way that I barely could see. So I asked those people to wait, and we waited for the fog to pass, and I turned to my right and I see this little girl in the window, and she's perfectly lit. So I start to yell to her in my terrible Italian if I could take her picture, if she'd get her parents to ask permission. And it turns out she answered me in perfect English because her grandfather was American and went to Harvard in 1956 and was in the same dorm as my father in 1956.
You're kidding me.
So not
This
only
is like such a charmed life, like through this beautiful lens of this project of like communication and human connection.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's all the work is about in the end. Like, I hope they're beautiful pictures. I hope people really like to look at them. But in the end, I realized it's just made me realize, like, if you reach out and meet a stranger, you're gonna be connected to them in some way. So the light was totally wrong for Across the Way. I shot this, and then the light ended up being magical in the first picture. So I was.
Do you ever do it the opposite way around? You never take the picture without consent? You never like take the picture and then ask for consent and then we'll throw it away?
So with pictures during COVID, I've had some like high school students who've been interning for me and who wanted to like learn how to do the project. And teaching is a big part of my life. So I love to teach people how to do it. So there's one girl in New York who sees into 16 different apartments. And she doesn't quite know how to use her camera perfectly to do it yet. So with her, I have done many test shoots, and then we left notes for all the neighbors that we could see to see if they'll agree now that they know what it is. So I've never done it myself that way, but because it was COVID and she was a little bit nervous to like go out and leave notes, we decided to do it that way. And then I actually, like, this was another crazy thing, is one of the people in one of the windows I recognize as a collector of my artwork. And so I then emailed her all the pictures and she was able to ask her neighbor. So usually I never would, but even in this situation, it ended up being that there was a connection to be made.
Have you had people say no?
So almost never. It's very, very rare that people say no. In Italy, I had this super charming assistant who he could ask anybody anything and they would say yes. And in Paris, Le Monde helped me meet people. So people were into being in Le Monde. In New York, almost nobody said no, except somebody I went to RISD with, which I thought was really funny.
Really?
So,
Yeah, a fellow artist. But yeah, almost never have people said no.
Sounds like RISD to me.
Yeah.
so explain the process. Like, you have this style and project that is perfectly situated to everybody being stuck at home during COVID. And as you and I have talked about offline, a lot of other people have discovered window-to-window photography in the current moment.
Yeah, it's suddenly really, really popular.
Yeah, exactly. So talk about the sort of both what you're doing in this period, which you've kind of alluded to, but how you transition to a kind of group, almost crowdsourced model of doing this, but also what other people are doing and how the idea has caught on.
Well, it's funny that we mentioned the Eastman Museum already, because I had a show there 2 years ago of this work in their project space, which was a space to introduce work that is not quite finished and is evolving. And in that show, I had two bodies of work. One is the photographs where I go places and photograph from window to window. And the other was a body of work that I did when I couldn't travel, where people would write me as the work got popular. Strangers in different countries would write me and say, I see my neighbor's window. How do I do the project? And I would Skype with them, and this was pre-Zoom, and have them connect their camera to the computer. And I had software where I could operate it remotely. And I would direct the shoot from New York and teach people how to do it. Now, as everybody's stuck at home, a lot more people have been writing me and saying, I'm in Krakow, I'd like to do it. I'm in Portugal, I'd like to do it. Or Buenos Aires. Everywhere in the world, people have been reaching out to me and wanting to do it. So I I sort of do these mini lessons. I teach photography also as a day job, or not as a day job, but as another part of my life. And I teach people how to do it. So originally in the show at Rochester, I was using very sophisticated cameras, very sophisticated technology. It's gotten so busy and so popular with this kind of so many people writing me that I've kind of pared down, and I'm like, anybody who has a view into their neighbor's window, if they have some way to ask their neighbor's permission, I will teach them a way of doing it. So some people have put signs in their window and say, I see you, can we talk? And like put their phone number there. Other people have gone knock. Some people do actually know their neighbors. So it's all been different how I do it. But yeah, it's definitely crowdsourced. So I showed you one a few minutes ago of a group of people with a fire pit. That was in far Western Australia, where they actually don't see their neighbors through the windows because the windows are so small in their houses. But every night, everyone comes out and builds a fire on their front yard. And they see their neighbor when they walk the dog or drive by. So yeah, the crowdsourcing has been kind of the most amazing part of the project because I can get places like they're
far Western
hours.
Australia.
Yeah, they're 24 hours. The Kimberley region of Australia, 24 hours from any city that there's no way I could go. So that's really fun.
How many people worldwide are involved in this now?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I could come up with a number.
And is this going to be its own show or a book? Like, I mean, I feel like COVID could be its own thing.
Well, so I don't really feel like it's COVID specifically. I do think COVID has opened people's eyes to seeing their neighbors more and connecting with the neighbors. But I definitely feel like this idea of connection is important in anybody. So I'm hoping it goes beyond COVID. So I do hope it will be a book of its own, the remote pictures. It's also going to be a play, which was supposed to be on YouTube Live next week, but we actually are delaying it because of all the events going on right now until June 22nd. But two playwrights took two of my pictures and imagined what they saw looking across to the neighbors' windows.
Is it called Rear Window?
Sorry. I had not seen Rear Window until I was done with this
wow, because
project.
Are you kidding me?
We actually have a question on YouTube. Can you talk about the influence of Hitchcock's Rear Window on this project? So I take it the answer is there is none?
Well, so when I finished the New York project, the movie was playing at BAM and I went and saw it. And since then, I have been obsessed with the movie. But
it is like one of my favorite Grace Kelly films of all time.
I mean, it's a great movie. I really am not a movie person. I like still images. I feel like movies, things go by too fast and you can't look. So whenever I watch a movie, I'm like pausing and looking carefully. So at the time, I don't think it was a big influence. I think during COVID, it's been more of an influence because I think it is like a quarantine movie. He's stuck in his house. He can't go anywhere. And so he has this relationship, which is how my global work started. The remote series is my son was sick. I couldn't travel. I was stuck at home. How would I travel and see the world? So for that reason, I feel like the work specifically responds to quarantining, but I don't think it's necessarily COVID. I think we all get stuck at home for many reasons.
So we have time for questions. If people have questions, you know the drill, flag them in the Q&A and we will rapture you in for live. So what you mentioned a book that you're writing. You've had a number of shows on this. What are the outputs other than discrete images?
So I have 3 books. I have one in New York, one in Paris, and then my 3rd book was supposed to be a global book. I was planning on going to every continent and doing the project. But then when I started shooting in Italy, Italians were so perfect for this project that I stopped and just photographed Italy. They loved to meet their neighbors. They were really open and helpful to the project. It was beautiful. So I do still want to do a global book. But I feel like traveling has changed so much right now, and I don't know when I'll ever be able to get on an airplane again. So I think the next will be a project. I've always loved books and museum shows, but I do feel like now that we are stuck at home, there will be more of an online presence for the project. So it's really fun to follow it on Instagram. Like, people are tagging the project and asking me for help to do theirs, and I'm posting those. So right now I still am very traditional and think of a book, but I think as the project evolves, it's going to have to be something more accessible all over the world.
And explain like the business side of this. How do you monetize a project like this? What's the, you do this for a living. How, how does it put food in your mouth?
So my daughter actually just said to me today that she will definitely not be an artist because it is, it's a very random way of earning a living. I did for years shoot commercially, where I would shoot for magazines or ad campaigns. So that kind of, my whole New York book was done while I was doing other work. But now that the work's gotten popular, I do have shows all over the world, and the work sells as fine art limited edition prints. Those are only the ones that I've made. I'm not selling pictures other people made. So like right now, it's still up just for a few more days. I have a show at Jackson Fine Art Gallery in Atlanta. And even through COVID, they've been finding a way to socially distance, show the work. And I have a gallery in Milan that they haven't been able to show the work during COVID, but they do it online. And then one in New York. So the gallery world is still there, fortunately.
I'm really curious about that because there's just this interesting way we had a few artists on a couple weeks ago, and we talked to them similarly about this. One of them was my friend Tira, who's actually also went to Brown, also went to did classes at RISD, and is now an illustrator and writes children's books. And we were kind of talking about how that is hard to monetize, and it's hard to get out and do events and do the types of things that she would normally kind of make money from. But then at the same time, this moment has kind of kept people in, and people want new content and new things to look at and to observe and to see. Does that change your relationship as a fine artist with the art, that that people are taking pictures and taking on your idea and your themes, but doing it from their iPhones and not from their fancy cameras with art direction and with the perfect lighting? Do you think that makes how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I have a show up at Jackson Fine Arts right now that's these beautiful prints, and you can see some of these on my wall. They're big prints. And when you go and stand in front of one of my prints and experience it, it's like you are standing in the neighbor's window. So I ultimately think, as a work of art, those are the most interesting. And that work has done very well during this process. The Atlanta Gallery, Jackson Fine Arts, has sold a lot of the work because I think people want to be with their neighbors right now. They want company, and the pictures provide that.
It's pretty hard to imagine a better advertisement for your work than the current circumstances.
And it's funny, I had just redecorated my apartment, rehanging all my work right before COVID, and I feel so comforted by the relationship with strangers in my apartment. It makes me feel less lonely.
I also think that I completely agree with you. Having something at scale like that is almost like walking into the scene like yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You're standing there. But the pictures other people are doing with less good cameras and less intricate lighting, I think provide a whole nother way of connecting. I mean, first of all, the connection I get to have with 25-year-old in Krakow who's telling me about her neighbor across the way, and who, when she went to ask, she had to bribe him by bringing him a meal because he was really hungry. Like, it gives me a whole nother experience and a whole nother way of meeting people. I don't necessarily think that picture is going to be the picture that lasts forever. But then,
yeah, but let me ask you about that, because what do you do with that body of work? I mean, you have this incredible body of work that is not going to go up at Jackson Fine Art, right? It's not, the individual images are not lasting or sustaining, but there is something about the aggregation of the project that is amazing. So what do you do with it? What's the output for that?
Let me share my screen and play a video for you. So I have neighbors imagine what they see in their neighbors' windows, and I do audio recordings of them too. So let me just go to, so this is an example of that. Let's close that. Wait, hang on. Why is that?
I gaze out the window for inspiration, and the right words seem. My deadline looms dangerously close. Mostly I see nothing. A dark apartment building spotted with dark windows and silence. At 6 o'clock each evening, I see a light in the apartment below me, and I watch as the mother and the daughter with the butterfly backpack arrive home. I know what to expect, and I look forward to it. A bowl of buttered penne sprinkled with Parmesan and an apple for dessert. Mother stands over the girl while she eats, supervising each bite. The girl slowly taking breaks to drink from her sippy cup. I cannot see what is in the cup, but I'm sure it's the same each day. Nothing seems to change.
So could you hear that okay?
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, that was amazing.
I'm doing
right. So like that is not a single image like the ones that you shoot, but if you aggregate 100 of those, there's an incredible experiential quality to it. So I'm sort of stuck on like, okay, Jackson Fine Art is not going to market that image, but there's got to be some output that reflects this collective experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the struggles always as an artist is like, we have very traditional ways of sharing work. And I think it is my job to figure out like how this collective experience is going to be shared. And when I started this project, there was no Facebook, there was no social media. And now I used to call people on their phones. Like I could look up somebody's address and figure out their phone number with reverse 411. So much has changed in technology and the way we communicate in the making of this work during this process that I feel like by the time I'm done, by the time I do this for a year, there's going to be a whole other way to communicate. And I don't know what that is yet.
Yeah, there's something really remarkable about how these pictures are kind of actually like, yes, they're opening your imagination to the stories of what's happening in the telling, but it's something about like how spidery all of the different narratives are that come off of it. The narrative between you and the art, the narrative between how that art is like picked up in a gallery and it goes and hangs in someone's wall and they're just strangers on another stranger's wall, but they like feel deeply connected to it. But then there's also like the story of the people who like found each other that were neighbors and like had to communicate in order to facilitate that, like that happening. I feel like there's an infinity amount of stories coming out of all of this work and this entire thing, including the overarching narrative of how just the project has changed, the technology around the project has changed. what do you think of selfies, and what do you think of things like strangers in New York and these types of profiles that go up and to talk to strangers? I feel like that's oddly similar to like something that you're doing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love the misconnections column in the New York Times when people, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things, a lot of people are photographing into their neighbors' windows right now and are skipping the part that I feel like is the most satisfying, which is to bridge that window gap and connect with the neighbor and decide to commit to a relationship. So I'm not particularly interested in selfies or self-portraiture. I'm really interested in using the camera as a way of connecting with others. And it's interesting because the technology's changed so much now that cameras are used more and more for spying and gathering data. If I can take a step in reversing that a little and having the camera be a way of connecting people. I think with everything that's going on in the world right now, I think it's very obvious that we need to know other people's stories better. And art is a really good way of standing in someone else's shoes.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that like, I'm kind of dying to see one of these. Think that I might have seen your show in Rochester. Like, it's actually, now that you say that, feels very familiar. And I'm like, maybe I've seen some of these before, this style. But yeah, I just think that the fine art element is like tremendous, but just what you evoke in asking the question and all of the things that it entails about consent and privacy, speech and like connection and community. I think it's beautiful. I think it's fascinating.
Thank you.
So Gail, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for coming. We finished just before the lightning.
Are you guys about to get some lighting? I've been watching the lighting in Ben's room change.
I've had to change the camera settings. Speaking of cameras,
to
deal with the sudden darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's a DC summer all of a sudden. We had delayed non-spring, and then all of a sudden we sort of skipped spring and went directly to summer, where, for those of you who don't know, DC, we have an evening thunderstorm is kind of the normal thing in DC. I guess it's part of being in the swamp.
I hated my summer there, my couple summers there.
The funny thing is, I hate heat with the passion of 1,000 burning suns, but I have come to love DC summers in a weird, perverse way. And maybe I'll do the monologue about this tomorrow, what they have come to mean to me. I actually like the DC summer. Gail Hillary Albert Halaban, it has been a pleasure. It's not every day that the world catches up to you and it becomes, as Andy Warhol would say, your 15 minutes. But like, dude, you've totally earned this.
Thank you.
And come back and join us sometime.
Thank you so much. Great seeing you, Ben. Nice meeting you, Kate.
It was an honor to meet you, Gail. Your art is amazing.
Thank you.
We will be back tomorrow at 5:00 p.m. Kate, tomorrow it's just us, right?
It's just us. Yeah. And your monologue about DC summers.
Yeah, I will do a monologue on DC summers, which I will ponder overnight. On Sunday, we have a mystery guest that I will bring. I'm not forgetting that again, Kate. And what do we have Monday?
Monday, according to, had a big start to the week.
We've got a big
Matt Iglesias on Monday, and Tuesday we have Larry Lessig.
Tuesday we have Larry Lessig, and we've got some other guests. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a good week on
Matt Miller.
Fun. Yeah, Matt Miller's going to join us. And I want to have this conversation with Gail reminds me that we should have the filmmaker Liz Garbus, who I went to elementary school with and reconnected with in the Trump era. She's incredible and thoughtful and has done just amazing work. We'll plan the show for the week on tomorrow. And until then, what do we say, Kate?
If you can have fun, in lieu of fun, come hang out with us or take pictures of your neighbors through their windows with their consent. With consent.
With consent.
Cheerio,
Thank you
guys.
so much for coming, Gail.